very good. All right. All going in the right direction so far. All right, well, I think I've met everybody here probably more than once or twice, but I'm Elle Baker, Open Space and Environmental Planner, and I'm going to introduce John McAllister and his team to present the Gibson Park Resiliency Planning. So we've been working on this project with a grant through Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and I'd like to welcome Carolyn as well, who's on the call. And thank you for the funding and for the support for this project. So as we have moved through our MVP process, which started a few years back with MVP planning to become eligible for MVP funding for action grants, we moved forward from that into an MVP resiliency study for the Point of Pines and the Riverside community. At that time, there were a number of resiliency measures that were identified. Prior to that, we also received Seaport Economic Council funding to prepare a master plan for the riverfront area, which also tied in nicely to our coastal resiliency study. Some of those recommendations you'll see here in the Gibson Park Resiliency Project. The nice thing about this project is we were actually able to tie resiliency into recreation as well in a waterfront area, which is going to be a great benefit for the neighborhood as well as the community as a whole. So we're really excited about this project, and through our the Action Grant Fund, we're able to move forward into design and permitting packages. So what you'll see here is we're at probably 3/4 of the way through the project, and John's going to go into greater detail with what they've looked at and the analysis that's been completed up to this point. Following this presentation at about 6:45, we're going to transition into the updates for the Riverfront Boatyard, which I believe all of you are well aware that that's been acquired by the city at this point. And we have moved forward with the feasibility study, and we'd like to share the results of that as well. We thought it made a lot of sense, seeing as very similar audience with interest in both projects. So we could do it with one-stop shop rather than having two separate meetings on two separate evenings. So if we finish early, we'll absolutely move along, but we've allocated 45 minutes for each project. So with that said, I'd like to introduce Carolyn, if you want to say a few words about yourself and your support for this project and the MVP program as a whole.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Carolyn McKeonburg. As Elle said, I am the Greater Boston Regional Coordinator for the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant Program. So we're excited to support the Gibson Park Resiliency Project for this fiscal year. We awarded the project in the last round, and we have a big emphasis in our program on nature-based solutions to climate resilience, as well as community engagement, and supporting community need. And so Elle has shown me how much the community is valuing this project, which is really great to see. So thank you for inviting me this evening, and I'm looking forward to the update on how things are going.
Thanks for joining us. I'm just going to go straight down my screen here. Jack Bukhari. You're still on mute.
Hi, yeah, sorry.
There you go.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I represent the, I'm not sure, the Beach Association or the Gibson Park Community Garden, both of them, possibly.
A few different hats, Jack, a few different hats. Long-term resident of the Point of Pines as well,
Right.
And community advocate. So thanks for joining us tonight.
No problem. Glad to be here.
I also have Loretta. I am trying to promote you to panelist, so give me 1 second. Elaine?
I'm here. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you? Thanks for joining us tonight.
Excited about this. I'm glad you invited us.
Yeah, thanks for coming. I'm glad to have you here.
Absolutely.
I'm desperately trying to promote Loretta to panelist, but it's not clicking over. Just bear with me, Loretta. We also have Chris from Rep. Janino's office.
you guys doing? The rep had a prior engagement this evening, but I'm happy to be here on her behalf and, hear what everybody has to say. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Mike Hinojosa?
Hi, everyone. Michael Hinojosa, Director of Parks and Recreation.
Thanks for joining us. Okay. Bob O'Brien. I feel like I haven't seen you in forever, so
Yeah,
welcome.
it's been a
Good to
while.
see
Al.
you.
I'm Bob O'Brien. I'm Director of Economic Development for the City of Revere, and I was the moderator of the Riverfront Master Plan Advisory Group.
Thanks for being here. Okay, Loretta, I don't know if you are able to share your screen. I am trying to promote you to panelist, but for some reason you're not able to, it's not clicking over. I'd also like to introduce John Shu, Chair of the Conservation Commission, as well as a member of the Riverfront Master Planning Group. John?
Hey everyone, that's me.
That's you. Thanks for coming.
And a Point of Pine
And a
resident.
Point of Pine resident as well.
Yeah.
So we got 3 hats there as well. So a lot of people wearing a lot of hats. Loretta, I don't know if you're able to speak. I'm clicking, at least you should be able to speak if you're not sharing your screen. Okay, we'll give you a moment. With that, I'm going to turn it over to John, and if you could also introduce Tony as part of your team or
Yeah, okay.
side team. You've both been working on different projects, but also working simultaneously together. So I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself and your team. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is John McAllister. I'm the principal of McAllister Marine Engineering. We've worked with the city previously on the master plan project that we referenced, and we've been pushing forward into here. We're also working on the boatworks feasibility study that we're going to talk about in the latter half of this presentation, and that was worked on with Arrow Street, who also did the master plan, along with Sean Sanger from Copley Wolf Design Group. And on my team, I have Rich Baldwin and Jay Borkman working with us. They were both also heavily involved with the master plan process as well. So I guess in the interest of time, should I just jump right in?
Absolutely.
All right. So these are the kind of the things that we want to talk about tonight, go through how we got to this point, what we've done so far, and what are our steps moving forward, and then really just get into a discussion, get kicked around some ideas, talk about what we're thinking about doing. But as you can see, this is a pretty great area, great spot. We get the Pines River right there, the Saugus River at the top, and just great resources, great green space. Although we found out we're out there about 2 weeks ago, very heavily exposed to wind, so it can get a little biting when it's cold out there. But that's all for the better. So I don't really need to go through this too much. Elle kind of introduced that stuff. All this stuff was a lot of these ideas were started kicking around during the master plan process, and that was funded through Seaport Council, and then through the state and the MVP program. We got funding to go forward into some real getting down into the dirt and doing some design details, and that's where we are here. So for where we are and what we're doing, I'm trying to have 3 community forums. This is the second of those. We'll have one more probably in May. We had to get site survey and wetland delineation, so we know where our resource areas are, also what the topography is in and around the site, because as you'll see when we talk about later, we're going to do a lot of regrading, a lot of landscape sculpting. Carolyn had mentioned trying to do nature-based solutions. So one of the things that we're trying to do with our flood management and our stormwater management is to work with the landscape, have it work for us, to have these natural protections. They're actually more resilient in the long term, and they'll fit in better with this very unique kind of ecological environment that we're in located in the area of critical environmental concern in the from the Marsh area that's just across the Pines River. So there's a lot of parts at play there, and I think these nature-based solutions are actually very important to what we're doing. So if any of you are out there earlier this week, on Monday and Tuesday, you might have seen this drill rig popping around, poking some holes. We did some borings to get some geotechnical data the walkways that we're going to have through the marsh areas, but also to understand soil conditions and groundwater conditions. Groundwater is very important because we're going to be storing stormwater on site, and we need to make sure that we have enough separation from the groundwater table and our storing so we can maximize the efficiency of our system. And then we're working through the engineering design process. We'll go through some of what we're looking at, but there's a lot of pieces at play. And working with Sean and his team, there's also a lot of exciting stuff that makes these infrastructure improvements functional so that it's got dual purpose and dual use. I guess this image right here that Sean created for us shows it really great. So to the right under here, we'll have our multi-purpose field, and we're going to have stormwater storage below that. And then we're creating new marsh in the living shoreline along the edge, but we're going to have a marsh walkway through it so people can get out and get over the water, take it in and enjoy it. And then we'll also have some kind of stadium seating, for lack of a better term, step seating that raises up the elevation, that provides a spot to look at to the fields, but also kind of a physical barrier between the edge of the field and the edge of the and start of our shoreline and our wetland marsh areas. So some pretty cool stuff on there. And then towards the end of the process, we're not there yet, but when we get to the third meeting, we'll have much more detail on where we are in terms of regulatory outreach, initial inputs on process, and developing those permit packages. And then we'll file that all up with a design report that's going to be kind of how we step this forward. So with that, I want to jump right into the things that we're looking to do. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to be storing some stuff under the field. So we're going to be raising up some of the grades around the baseball field that you see now. It's going to be extended out further to the north and a little bit to the west. So that is a little bit of fill within this floodplain area. It'll be elevated above that. So in order to offset that, we're going to do some landscape sculpting. We're going to be creating new salt marsh. It's not going to be a perfect, one-to-one match, but we're creating new salt marsh. We're putting in areas, and the benefits of this salt marsh, you can see there's a couple examples of what they look like. This is actually, there is some good salt marsh on site. You can see it when the tide goes out, but they make natural protections. They're great. If they can get a good base where they're not eroded and they're well established, they can really calm down wave action, provide habitat for creatures and for fish. They're really effective at what they do, and they're very resilient. And one of the things that we're going to try and do with this is the big issue that we're fighting, and everyone's fighting along the East Coast, is rising sea levels. So we're going to put in some space for the marsh to creep up. So that way they will continue and maintain their protection as sea levels rise. The protection that the marsh provides now will be able to adapt and creep its way up to a certain extent. We can't go, if we get 6 feet of sea level rise, we're not going to go creep that high up with this project, but you have at least 2030, 2050 is what we're shooting for, our kind of design events. And then for stormwater management, so we'll talk about some of the bigger stuff in the next slide, because obviously within the neighborhood of Riverside, there's some pretty significant historical flooding issues, but we are redeveloping it. There is a lot of infrastructure in the park. So what we're going to try and do is decentralize our stormwater. Don't give it a chance to collect and pick up volume, pick up speed. That's what erodes. That's what causes the flooding and makes it harder to deal with. So the more you can treat it at the source, the better off it is, the easier it is to handle. And one of the ways to do that is both functional and attractive is through the use of these rain gardens. These are a couple of photos that Sean was able to provide to us, and they're pretty much, they get a specialized soil mixture that we plant inside of them. They have enough organic matter that the plants can take into it, but they're porous enough that the water can drain and filter through it. And then even the roots of the plants, they help absorb some nutrients in the stormwater runoff as well. So they're just a natural filter, and they have some storage capacity. It's about a 6-inch reveal in the grade. It's kind of like a cup in there that you allow for some ponding. And then depending on the subsurface soil conditions, there'll either be a perforated under drain pipe, or they can just recharge directly into the groundwater. But these are just really functional stormwater management tools because they don't take up as much space as you would see for like a big detention pond that you would see at like a, big box store development that we typically have. They're much more attractive. Again, they're more functional, and we can put them in targeted places where they don't disrupt the flow of the park and how things move along throughout the site. But the big issue that we have is at high tide, all of the outfalls in the neighborhood, they're submerged, and because they have check valves, so the seawater doesn't come back up into the stormwater management system. That means they also can't discharge out to it. So there's nowhere for the water to go. So what it does is it just backs up onto the street and floods the neighborhood. And we've seen the photos in the neighborhoods and been out there actually even during a couple of storm events. And even just from King Tide event with a rain, you're going to get water into the neighborhood. So how are we going to deal with that if we can't discharge at high tide? Well, we're going to provide some offline storage, put in a pump chamber, kind of at the corner of the boatwork site, and reconnect some new piping to get water flowing to there so it can back up, and then put it underneath the field. Kind of these are concrete ones. We most likely use a plastic one because they're easy to implement. They come delivered. You can just have two guys carrying them out there, whereas with these concrete ones, you would need specialized equipment. But you can see the idea of what we're thinking is you're going to have a ball field on top of it, and below it is just going to be stormwater management. And so if we can, we'll promote as much infiltration, recharge into the ground as we can. But if the tide starts dropping and we'll have too much flow, we'll have an overflow, and we can discharge it back out into the Pines River. That at least buys a lot of time. We're still working on sizing on it, but the initial sizing we had was something like a 4-inch storm that we can handle with this field, and we might even expand it into some other areas for some different ideas that we're looking at. So there's a lot of potential with that. However, one of the things we don't want to do is be pumping seawater that comes in. So as I mentioned, the tide comes up, and as sea levels are rising, it's coming in more and more into the neighborhood. Just a good high tide will puddle up. And if you guys are familiar, this is right at the top of Mills and Thayer. You can there's kind of almost like a raceway right here where it kind of has an easy path up and builds up into there. So what we don't want to do is overwhelm our system with seawater from the Pines River. So if there's any way we could effectively build that off, there are plans for a longer term through the state econ study that was done in the first phase of the MVP work. They have a couple of great ideas for a flood wall, some kind of glass top structure that can be adapted to rising sea levels, but can provide keep the Pines River out essentially but that's more of a long-term solution that is significant expenditure, and it's going to take a lot of emphasis and fight to get through. So what we were thinking is for a shorter term solution that still gets you protection up until what's projected to 2030, essentially it would protect a 10-year storm in 2030. So if we can build up to something about, if you look at this thing, about the top of this post and beam here is about elevation 10. That would get you right at the limit of the existing floodplain now. And so what we would do is we have to excavate some soil out to rebuild the field. If we can we can convey that into these geotubes or geobags, some sort of system along that. This is a project that I did down in Virginia, and this was a coastal one, but it's the same idea. Is you reuse the material, you fill them up in the bags, and this is the profile of it. So you fill up the geotube, so it's a solid structure. So rather than having a hard concrete wall, it's it's a nature-based solution because you're reusing soil and material that already have on site. We would plant it with some native vegetations. They'd have to be salt tolerant given the environment, but they would effectively build up a berm along this, and we'd have to have some kind of protection on it to keep protected from snow plows along those. We're still working on those details to come out here, but you would have this profile kind of flipped the other way, looking along here, and it would be the same height as this, so it wouldn't impact the viewscape, but it would be a solid up to elevation 10. It wouldn't allow the water to come in. And what we would do is because you still need access to the beach and you can get down to the river, and there's work that needs to be done to even clean out the outfalls and stuff like that. So we could put in 6, 8 targeted access points, and we would have to we'd probably build in some kind of concrete wall up to support it, and you could put in either flashboards or floodgates that in anticipation of a big storm or super high tide that you can do it to protect it. But in your day-to-day operations, there's still access. People are still able to get down to the water, but it's only in targeted places. It's a lot easier than having to do that like sandbag, because this is like 2,400 feet or something along those lines. So if we have, if you're only dealing with 40 feet or 60 feet of flashboards rather than 2,400 feet of sandbagging, it's much easier to implement and protect. And that, again, will provide up to elevation 10 a significant amount of storage, so that stormwater management system that we're putting in on top of that is focused only on handling the stormwater runoff, anything that's coming off of Route 1A, anything that's flooding in the neighborhood, because that can't discharge while it's high tide, because those outlets are going to be submerged. So this is something that we're still in the early stage of development. And I just wanted to show this because this was only 6 days after they put this in there that you already started getting some growth out of it. They have different color fabrics and geotubes, but they adapt well to the environment. They're very strong for what they are. They'll be able to retain it, so it won't be like, you don't have the risk of erosion. That's the nice part about that. That if you do get a storm event and you get some wave action, it's not going to erode like you would have an unsupported slope, and they can be vegetated. And within a growing season, the idea would be to put those out there in the early spring, plant them with plugs, and within 6 months, by October, there'd be enough cover that you wouldn't actually see the sandbags there, and it would just kind of look like a landscape dune or a beach, something along those lines. So we would have a natural or softer look, but structurally incredibly important for keeping out those rising seawaters. So that's something that's still in design process that we're fleshing out now, but I think it's a crucial part of this whole holistic approach, trying to hit it from every angle. And then there's some functional items too. So we talked about the benefits of Saltmarsh, but if people don't know about Saltmarsh, if they can't enjoy it, it's a tough sell. So there are some really cool features, and Sean was able to send me some of these clips, and this one over here is one of my favorites up in Prince Edward Island. I just think it's the coolest thing, where you can walk. It's like thousands and thousands of feet. You just walk through Saltmarsh, and you get to go see. There's birds going through there. You just all sorts of wildlife, and it's just really cool. It controls access. It gets people out over it, but it's also it provides protection. And one of the things that we have is we're going to want have some rest places. People can get out over the water, just sit there and look out. I mean, you can look back. There's some nice views back at the skyline of the city. Just because one of the main things that came out of the master plan is we want a whole connection along the Saugus and Pines River. So part of the plan is to have some kind of a walkway, be it elevated or at grade, from the Boatworks property all the way up through the development at Gibson Point and almost over to the General Roads Bridge. So it's a really good opportunity, and there's a lot going on, but it'd be great if we can just mix it up with different experiences and get people, like I said, out over the water, out experiencing stuff in this way. If it's elevated, it doesn't impact the habitat as much. There is some shading issues, obviously. You won't get as much, but you won't get people walking through. It's controlled access. So it's less likely to erode, because actually, if you look down, there are some spots where you can tell people get down to the beach and they are eroded, they're trampled through. So this is like a little bit better for the access. Then on the edge of the field, give people a chance to just sit and relax and watch, but also have the function of getting it up, providing this elevation. These are just some really cool examples of step seating, where you're up against your infrastructure is up above the flood surge levels, and you're providing a space for people to sit, relax, and congregate, which is one of the main points of a park. You want to get there, be outside, enjoy what there is to offer, and watch what's going on. So I think this is a really nice advantage to add into the project. Just give me a second, get dry mouth. So this is where we are in the project. This was our original kind of timeline from really getting going, and we have to be done this fiscal year, which is June 30th. So we're pretty much halfway through the calendar, I guess, for this year, where we're supposed to be, but we're more than halfway done with our activities. You can see we've done a lot of this stuff. The borings were done this week. We just need to get the lab results back on some of them, but the site design has actually progressed probably further than that. And so what I'm hoping for the next meeting is we'll be able to come back and talk more about, we'll have the designs much more fleshed out. We'll have a lot more details, be able to talk about target design storms, what kind of capacities we'll have for everything, but also talk about the functionality of the park, how this resiliency benefits the park, and how we have these different features within it. So this is kind of what we have conceptually for the park, this area along here, if you can see my cursor. So again, this is the connection to the Gibson Point project, the G&J towing site. They're going to be having a boardwalk on there. So we really think it would be nice again to make that connection all the way around. So we're going to have that connection here. We're going to have a new salt marsh in this area over here. This is all going to be brought back into here, and we're going to be elevated walkway through it. Comes back around. We're going to keep the the putting green and the golf tees over there, but still have this walkway elevated all along here. And this is the new multi-purpose field. And as you can see, kind of the old ball field was about this. So it's a good extension of what it is, but we'll have that step seating along the elevated walkway here. We'll have a lookout here, maybe a lookout over here for people to sit down and rest. And this connections all the way back down to the boat works facility. You can actually see the building on it right here. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But we're going to have a floating dock and pier that people can launch if they can carry a kayak or something out there. That's public access. We're getting people out there for that. Bob, you have a question?
Yes, John, just two quick questions. The berm that you discussed on Mills Avenue, how extensive will that be? Will that be for the length of Mills Avenue? And the second
it would have to
question,
be.
okay, great. And the second question, somewhat related to that, in a major storm event where you may have a high tide, etc., you mentioned you'd like to segregate the seawater from the stormwater. In a situation like that, I presume that's impossible. Does getting seawater into the storage system deteriorate it in some way, or is there a real problem if under exceptional circumstances, seawater and stormwater get combined?
Yeah, so that's a great question and a really good point. So if we use the plastic chambers, it's not so much of an issue for the chambers themselves to have the seawater in it, because that's not really susceptible to corrosion. However, it would be for the pumps and the electrical wiring and everything like that. So I've already spoken with with the pump dealer and designer that we're going to work with, that it needs to be seawater tolerant. And I'm sure even the one at the Point of Pines, the pump station over there, is probably seawater tolerant. They use different equipment so they can do it so it doesn't rust and can be able to handle that. But those are extreme conditions that are pretty harsh that we are cognizant of, that the system needs to hold. And you're right. Once, again, that's up to elevation 10 is what we're shooting for that target. Once it overtops that, then then it gets mixed in, and there's no telling where the water came from or how we deal with it. It's just you got to deal with the water as it's mixed up. So, and to your
I
first
guess just
question,
one more related question.
Yeah.
Let me just ask on that one. Is it possible to build that up, the berm up over time to keep ahead of sea level rise, or does that require a completely new and different installation?
Yes and no. You could do it, but at some point, there's structural issues that could happen either in the roadway or on the berm that you'd have to balance out. So you'd be it wouldn't be cost effective, I guess, over time to continue building that up. That's why the longer term solution is what AECOM had recommended. It's adaptable, that it can go up. You'd want to
Okay.
have a strong foundation for it.
I understand.
But just going back to your first point, we would have to do it essentially the whole length of Mills Ave because it's pretty flat in there topographically. So if we leave any low points, the water's just going to sneak around and creep back in. You know, we can't leave any paths. We gotta kind of tie off from elevation 10 to elevation 10 all the way around. Otherwise, the water comes in. So that's one of the things that we're looking at is topographically is how we can meet that grade.
Good, good. Thank you.
All right. Looks like Paul's got a question.
Yes, good evening. So this structure or berm that you're proposing, what's the life expectancy that we can expect from it before a longer term solution would have to take over?
So structurally, it would, if it gets fully vegetated and maintained, that it would probably last 30 years. But in terms of sea level rise, we're looking at it's a shorter term. It's a 10, 15-year solution. It's not gonna adapt to the 2050 sea level rise conditions that we're looking at. So what'll happen is if it gets left in place, it's just going to be overtopped more often, more frequently, and we'll be kind of back in the position we're in now.
So
Okay.
to John's point, we're actually looking at this as a short-term solution. We have applied for funding for the design of a seawall, but we know that will take a few years to design, implement, and fund construction for. So we are looking at this as a short-term solution and taking advantage of the fill that we're going to have on hand.
It's the beneficial use,
So it's sort of a benefit, a co-benefit of the Gibson Park project is that we would be able to implement the short-term solution.
Okay,
But
so
still plan for a longer-term solution that would account for sea level rise for 2050, 2070.
okay, so in a perfect world, we can expect that, say, within 10 years, we'll have a more permanent solution and this berm will serve our purposes till that point.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And this is Rich Baldwin. One of the nice things about the berm is it's going to be a lot for the short term. It'll be much easier to permit because it is a nature-based solution versus a hardscape like if we were to put in a concrete wall or something like that.
Just a quick question. You mentioned, John, if it's well maintained, I presume the maintenance will have to be done by the city of Revere. Is it labor intensive maintenance or is it just keeping an eye on things?
Well, that's one thing we were talking with Paul about today, and one of the things we were saying is, well, maybe if we can put some granite curbing along the edge of Mills Lane, that's just going to protect it from the snow plows already, or putting that post and beam structure back in front of it to protect it from plows. Then it's really just a vegetation maintenance issue. That's much
Yes,
simpler. Than,
okay.
than having to deal with that.
The only other consideration is that we would be providing access points to the beach. So there may be times at high tide or threat of storm that whatever those barriers are for those access points would need to be maintained and implemented.
Close off. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think Jack Bukhari has a question as well.
Yeah, but Paul, actually, it was Paul asked my question, which is on the design life, but believe me, I live really close to the Seagrass, and it's tough. Once you've got a dune, once you've got vegetation growing on it, it becomes, it would become kind of permanent. What are the consequences of tearing it up afterwards to replace it? Or would you a permanent structure go behind it?
So yeah, that's a very good point you make. So there's a lot of challenges working on Mills Ave. There's a lot of utilities in there, and again, whatever's being put out there, it needs to be functional. I think like Rich and Jay always like to say, it's got to be designed for the norm and for the storm. So you don't want to have just like an 8-foot wall that cuts off everybody's view that doesn't make any sense when it's low tide and things are calm. So they talk about like a glass top wall or something along those lines. But if it does, the vegetation does get established and it does become something permanent. I mean, it would be permanent as a temporary structure. But it's in a geobag. So the nice part is it's a contained thing. So the removal of it, I mean, it's most likely going to get ripped as they're put in, but at least it's a clear delineation of where where this temporary structure was. So in terms of a permitting strategy, we can show that this was always intended as a temporary structure. We're going to excavate down to there, and then the permanent structure would go in. We don't have all the details on the permanent long-term solution, so I can't say with 100% confidence how that would play out. But yeah, it could happen just inside of it. It could happen just outside of it. Because one of the things they were talking about, certainly along Thayer, was like a adjustable gate, hydraulic gate. So that might be a solution as well.
And also, Jack, there's this on the geobag, it wouldn't be submerged aquatic vegetation. It would be salt tolerant. So it's kind of a different, I'm not a plant guy, but I understand it's a kind of a different kind of vegetation. So it's not the same as, submerged aquatic vegetation. It's a huge deal when it comes to permitting and the like.
Oh yeah, no, I'm real familiar with the local seagrass that we planted here 20 years ago. Now it's everywhere. I mean, it propagates quickly. I would expect if it's if we plant even we cover it in probably 3 to 5 years, and it wouldn't take that much to get it started. And it's tough. You couldn't pull one of those out with your hands.
That's what we're looking for. Yes, good and
Oh,
sturdy.
I mean, I presume we would stay with what's already proven, locally. I'm not a
Yeah.
biologist. Sorry.
No, absolutely. And this is Sean. I just want to kind of interject there briefly, but yeah, I think we want to make sure that this is all really kind of tied in with the natural systems and making sure the plant choices and heights and, maintenance and species are all being really sensitive and tying into that broader kind of, environment, if you will, and culture up there for sure.
It does sound though like it would be ideal if you could install the permanent solution and leave the temporary one in place.
Yeah, where the temporary one just becomes, again, a softer,
Yeah,
part of
the landscape, literally.
Yeah.
This is Jay working with John and Rich, and one of the things that we have to be cognizant of is what it will take to permit all of this. We're quite comfortable about all of the features that we're putting on the park itself. When we start getting in along Mills Ave and next to the river, that's where the permitting authorities are going to be. They're going to have their radar up as to what we're doing, what we're proposing here. It's fortunate that it can be a temporary system that could be adapted long-term, but it's probably the thing that can get permitted within a reasonable amount of time to fit in with the overall schedule of the park and boatyard reconstruction. If we were to try and do what the MVP is proposing with a much more hardscape structure, we would probably be permitting that for a couple of years. So we think it's better to reuse material. It's cost effective. It gets keeps some of that water that has been a real pain to the residents and to the park out of the system. And it'll be a benefit short term. And if they can incorporate it into the long-term solution that the MVP is coming up with, then it works all the way around.
Yeah, no question, a phased approach makes sense.
Exactly.
I don't think there's any doubt about that.
And then just kind of want to talk more, 'cause we've got a couple minutes on timing, just show you some of the designs for the stormwater management features that we have here. So you can see these grade lines. This is all the new salt marsh that we're creating up here, called the Northern Marsh. It's to the north. I'm not that creative. This is the Southern Marsh, but it's to the south. Over here, this would be all subsurface stormwater under our field, those concrete chambers. And we just did, you can see there's a boring right here. We just did a boring right there. So maybe under these new tennis courts, we could do some storage, but we are going to have a big rain garden here. We're going to have a bioswale here, some bioswales along here. We'll probably do some rain garden over here. Just get some targeted areas where we can get some planting and some, again, decentralize our stormwater management. That's kind of the next step in the process, is to do our hydrologic modeling to see where the water's going, how we can treat it and move it forward. But we're going to try and pick that up as much as we can. And then our pump station is down here along here. We'd have to have some kind of a backup standby generator. So obviously, we want the pump station to be running when flooding happens. And flooding happens usually when storms are the worst and power goes out. So we want to be able to run during those operations, and we just pump up through here. We will do some work, at least for now, along Thayer to redo this this drainage network so we can get water from off the road and into the pump station along those lines. So next steps,
I'm not sure whether Loretta is on the line, but I'd be interested in Elaine's feedback on Mills Avenue in particular.
As to what, Bob? As far as the swale working?
Well, I mean, you guys have been involved since, we did the master plan. So if you have any thoughts on how this has evolved and changed. Obviously, the berm is a new feature we didn't really have, but again, we think keeping the river out is a new feature, and then working on Thayer Ave and Mills Ave, at least in that upper corner.
The reason I ask is not just because Elaine obviously lives in the Riverside, but that particular feature seems a response to feedback that we got in the master plan from the riverfront residents. And I'm encouraged that it's been moving in that direction, geographically, literally, figuratively.
Can you hear me, Bob?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can. Go ahead, Elaine.
I just wanted to say, as far as the flooding on Mills Ave, it's only certain sections of Mills Ave to flood, right? We know that?
Yes.
Okay, because from the boatyard to John Ave is your bad part. But I think the swale is a great idea all the way up, because like you said, it will sneak in. If you leave it open, it's going to come in. But I think it's a great idea.
And to answer, Loretta was actually on, but she was having problems with her Wi-Fi. So she was, I think, going to try to jump back on, and if she could.
Okay. I might have interrupted somebody. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. This is good. It's good to have the open discussion. So we're going to try for one more meeting in May, or early June at the latest. Just kind of give everyone a wrap up, give people time to process where we are. The next steps for me is, like I said, the hydrologic model we're going to work on for our engineering design, so we can size out these rain gardens. Actually, one thing, going back to this picture, maybe think of it. We know that this area, that passive recreation area to the north, it's always wet. It's always some standing water in there. So we did some borings in there, but we're going to regrade it, push the water out so that it has a chance to go and put in a bioswale over there. So at least the water doesn't sit there and stand and just puddle up like it does in this photo, and you can see it all along the edge. So we're going to try and make this green space a little less mushy as well. So it could be passive recreation. And then once the hydrologic features function. Someone say something?
Yeah, sorry. I think Jack has his hand raised, so I don't know if we want to address that before we move on.
Yeah.
Jack?
You're muted.
Sorry, that was unintentional.
Okay, no problem.
Before we do move on, though, I'd like to say, both Ella and John, this is very encouraging. And I'm especially excited that the ideas that began to emerge in the Riverfront Master Plan are now being implemented in a very substantive and expeditious way. And my compliments to you guys. Well done.
Thank you. It's been a large team that's been forging forward for a number of months now. I think we're going on 2 years now with starting with the master plan and moving forward through MVP support and Seaport Economic Council support. So it's been all of us on board. So thank you all for being here and all for staying engaged and advocating to move all these projects forward. I think we're doing well for time here. We're at 6:47. I want to make sure that we give enough time to the boatyard review. I don't think we haven't had any public meetings about that specifically in a while. So I'd like to also at this time welcome David Boyce from Arrow Street. If you want to say hello and say a few words. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Elle, thanks. Yeah, so happy to be here. We've been involved in these projects for a while, including heavily involved in the master plan. So excited to talk a little bit about our feasibility study that was completed recently for reuse of the boathouse.
Thank you. I'd also like to introduce Tony.
Hi, how's everyone doing?
Good.
Been working on that, excuse me, on the feasibility study as well as some other projects in the area.
Thank you. It's great to have both of you here. So with that, I will turn it over for the boatyard presentation.
Okay, so so for the history of this site, obviously it was a boatyard for the longest time. That's the name. But during the master plan process, we recognized a lot of potential in this facility and how it could extend Gibson Park, create some connections and have some functionality, some kind of a community rowing or getting people out to the water, because there isn't a lot of good water access for the public along the Pines of the Saugus River in this area. So there's a lot of potential, but without really looking at the building and the site and the condition that it's in, it wasn't sure what that potential could be. So that's where we tried to steer this feasibility study. Just looking at the structure itself, obviously it's got some character, but it's fallen out of good maintenance. So there's really two structures on there. There's this original brick structure, which is at a higher elevation, it's about elevation 9, whereas this the masonry unit, CMU unit addition that's on there, it's at an elevation 7. So that floods much more often. It's much more problematic. But there's also, I'm not an architect or a structural engineer, but I believe there are some significant challenges with all consistent flooding, just from tidal cycles and having those two buildings, the foundations tied together. So there are some challenges. Yeah,
John, I can jump in because I am an architect. I'm not a structural engineer, but we did work with our structural engineer to look at both of these buildings, because obviously the first thing you want to do when you're looking at any site is, especially if there's an existing building that served the purpose that you're trying to reinvigorate, is you want to understand if the existing building has value. And we'll talk a little bit more about it, but we did do a thorough structural evaluation of the building. And as John mentioned, we did look at the resiliency issues on the site.
Thank you for that, bailing me out. So I do know from I did study some structural classes in school. Those kind of cracks are not a good sign. That is in the existing building. And you can just, as David mentioned, they had both Goldstein Milano was the structural engineer and Peterson did the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, I believe, evaluation of both the existing functionalities and potential we go through the redevelopment options. So we looked at it. One of the things David and I and Tony were just talking about the other day is, we did this feasibility study. We've come through with some suggestions. However, until something happens, this building is still at risk. So the recommendations we make today may have to adapt if there is, some kind of significant storm damage that comes through and affects this building. So just one thing to keep in mind. But what we did was we looked at 3 different options for the building itself. I will preface this that we wanted to maintain the existing footprint, or at least keep the existing square footage as much as possible, because we were in the area of critical environmental concern. Really expanding that or increasing the impervious area would be very difficult to get past, and it would just complicate things and drive up costs. And if we can do it, if we can provide a functional space without having to do that, and I think these what these 3 options are, it's all the better. It's just an easier path forward.
Yeah, so John, I'll just jump in for a second. I mean, the first thing we did actually was really try to figure out the appropriate program for a community rowing house. You know, the goal would be to have a community center for rowing and small craft kayaks. One of the things we found out right away, and you can see it by this brown rectangle here, the boat storage room building that we have there, even if it was in, you know, great shape, had no resiliency issues, it's not quite long enough for the 8-man boats that are a key to the program. So in this particular option, you know, if renovating and saving the existing building were the smart thing to do, we would still have to do something about boats that are longer than the building.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I believe the building is 60 feet, and those longest sculls are 64. So you know,
Yeah, it was just short. Just short.
Exactly.
That's true of the main building as well as the addition.
That's correct, Bob.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, what they did was they went through and looked at back and forth different use spaces, uses of the spaces. This is kind of what came up as optimal based on the footprint that we're dealing with. It's about, you know, this 4,200 square feet of interior space. You know, and these different options, I won't go through it too much. If you guys want to go through it, I mean, feel free. But the big thing about the full rehab is, I think they couldn't put the MEP equipment on the roof.
Yeah, John, I mean, in terms of the program, we consulted with some people that have run these programs elsewhere. This is by no means a final program. We just needed to start somewhere. Once the city works and finds an operator, and that program could change as well. But this is just a starting point to evaluate each of these different options on an equal footing.
Yeah. Okay.
David, just a quick question. The length of the building is 4 foot shorter than the length of the sculls, but presumably they'd fit in, some of them at least diagonally. Is that correct?
No, they basically have a straight rack system that, I mean, if you think about it, you need to be able to not only store them in there, but you need to be able to walk in. You need to be able to have, you know, basically the kids pick these boats off the wall and take them out to the water.
I got you. Okay.
So from what I understood, the outdoor storage is not an issue as long as it's secured. I mean, these boats are meant to be on water, so they can handle the elements. It's just they wanted a place where they're, you know, off the ground, stacked, but they don't have to be necessarily weather enclosed.
Right. It's just that this particular option, you know, the existing building doesn't quite meet the needs of the program, so we'd end up having to build in some secured space adjacent to the building.
Right. And to David's
one other, sorry, go ahead, Al.
To David's point, this is a starting point, and one of the main things that we do want to promote in this space is a rowing program. So with that said, even though we're still at the very preliminary stages and we haven't secured an operator at this time, we just want to make sure that we're looking to build the capacity to be able to support that type of program. And so that's why we've looked at the full, partial, and a full new construction. So as we get into the next slides, you'll see how that can be adapted to support that type of programming.
Yeah, and just to clarify, in case it's not clear to everyone, the full rehab means we're keeping the existing structure as it is, and obviously putting it back up. There's no, I mean, there's demolition, but there's nothing. The shell, I guess, would stay That's my understanding of it, at least.
It's
Correct.
the right. It's the shell. It would require new foundations. It would require raising the floor elevations to make it resilient, though.
Right.
Right.
And so then there's a partial rehab where, if we go back to this photos, partial rehab, which would keep the brick structure, which again has some really good character to it, and then this part that has lower foundation would be demolished and rebuilt. And so again, another program, so you would retain this 2,400 square feet over here and then rebuild 1,800 square feet. And as you can see, what we discussed before, we were 4 feet short, and as long as our net square footage of impervious cover doesn't change too much, we're pretty good. So it's a little bit thinner in terms of the space, but it's longer so that those 64-foot skulls can fit in there. I think that's one of the big advantages of this scheme.
Yeah, that and the fact that the existing building, while it doesn't look like it's in great shape, the masonry is salvageable. Obviously needs new windows. It's got a nice volume to it. It can be a pretty interesting character space once it's renovated. Something that you wouldn't necessarily get with a new building.
And another thing too, I guess, just to talk, because we are on the resiliency theme, is having the mechanical equipment and the solar panels up on the roof. Again, that's just good resiliency practice in building design to elevate that. It's just, we couldn't do that on the full rehab. And then new construction would be essentially taking both parts of the structure down and rebuilding it new. And you have the option where you have more or less a blank slate. I don't know if that's a good term or not to use, but you at least starting with a fresh from the bottom up, but you might lose some of that character that goes along with it.
Yeah, that's true, and I think we still have to get through figuring out exactly what the permitting path would be for a whole new building. We think it might be a little bit simpler with the smaller addition and the existing building. But with that said, the construction market, we have to keep our eye on the construction market and figure out which one of these options becomes the most cost effective. Sometimes building new is actually more cost effective than renovating. We think in this case that may not be the case, but we'll continue to watch that.
And then we just want to look at the whole site as well, because the plan for this obviously is to make this community space. And since it's next to Gibson Park, and the master plan had some Gibson Park features coming in, really all needs to tie together. So there's really two ways that it's laid out that we're showing here, because there's the current access, which has to come through Thayer and Hayes. But there's also the next one in the future when the roundabout is built off of 1A North Shore Road. So some of the features you can see from Gibson Park is starting to, the actual property line probably cuts off somewhere along here. So we're going to have the new community garden would be relocated over here. We're going to relocate some tennis courts over here to this area. You're going to have a new parking access along here. I think we can get 19 new spaces. I don't know if this there it is. But there's going to be the stormwater management's over here, the rain garden. This could be the dog park over here. Another key feature is having that boardwalk extend down and get you out onto the water with this. You have a gangway here and floating docks along there to get people out, and those docks will have to extend out so they're not bottomed out at low tide as much as possible. And it would probably have to be over here, but as much as possible, get you out over there, out over the water. And rebuilding this revetment wall that's pretty dilapidated and rough shape. It's actually a couple different structures right now, but rebuilding it solid, it goes along with our plan of that elevation 10 carrying along Mills Ave. Because again, we need to, for resiliency and keeping the sea out, we need to keep that strong line. And when we were laying this out, working with the guys, we were very cognizant of what was happening along with the AECOM study that they did for the MVP, where they have those floodgates, the adjustable floodgates, that actually come back along through here. So what we tried to do was keep those on the south side and put all the infrastructure on Thayer onto the north side of the road, so there's no conflict. What you can't have is floodgate being crossed with a pipe, because as it goes up, it won't work. So that was kind of a unique challenge, but one of those things we'll address moving forward. But I think it's a good thing there. And then along this edge here, this grandstand section, again, people coming out off the water, if you kind of want to just sit and watch it, or if you want to watch your kids going out in the kayak, the seating spot, a really cool place to go out there, just take it in, taking the views. The Rumney Marsh is pretty unique. It's a special asset in the state. And it's good to get people on top of it. And then we know there is lobster pots that are that are stored on site. We don't want to obviously bump out existing users or existing access, so we still have a spot for that to happen along here as well.
John, I think it's going to show up in this section, but that area marked D that John was talking about, the seating, actually is it's both an amenity, but it's also a really functional element, because we're looking at raising the finished floor of the boathouse up to an elevation of 14, which anticipates sea level rise. So that area would be an area that helps the transition down to the water.
Yeah, absolutely.
John, could you describe in a little more detail what the purpose of the Thayer Avenue floodgates is or are, and the length of it? I mean, I'm thinking of you're on one side or the other. I just don't know exactly how that's meant to function.
Yeah, sure. So again, everything has to function by elevation. So the floodgates will be designed to meet a target elevation. And what you really have is, you can kind of actually see there's some topography lines on here, but North Shore Road is kind of the high point that bisects the peninsula. So you would have to have the whole permanent floodgate system, I think, is like 5,400 linear feet of floodgates, where it has to build up. And what these would not be, permanent visible floodgates. They would be subsurface, only deployed when the flood action happens. So it's kind of like at a hurricane barrier, it's open all the time, the boat's coming in and out, but when the storm comes, they close it and there's no getting out. So what that would do in this case, it would really just isolate Gibson Park. People wouldn't be able to access it during a flood event. However, I mean, that's kind of a okay sacrifice. I mean, you could still be able to get in and out of the neighborhood, I believe. Although I'd have to check on that, on how they would access it onto North Shore Road, but at least access to the north, that's really only what we looked at, would be cut off during this flood event. They're hydraulic gates, so they would just lift up.
I just want to point out that is that project itself is not in the scope of this project, but they are cognizant of potential future plans and trying to plan ahead for that, so that they're not overlapping. I just want to make sure that we're clear that that's, we're making mention of it, yes, but it is not in the scope of this particular.
Okay, that's helpful.
Project.
Thanks. Thank you.
And so then just the only other is the future access. It just shows it where you have the roundabout here. You can come off, drive to, you have the existing parking at Gibson, you'll be able to get to the existing parking over there. And the big challenges you'll see for over here is, if with the future access, you won't have the coming through off of Hayes. This will be kind of truck and trailer parking for the skulls and everything. Someone's going out. Whereas if you look on the current access, we're just going to put in some shoulders essentially for them to park it. I think 2 truck and trailers would be sufficient for a community rowing program.
Bob has another question.
Yeah, just a quick question of David. It seems to me at this stage, the partial rehab makes a whole lot of sense. subject to cost analysis, et cetera. And one of the advantages would be you would keep the more distinctive building. I mean, the picture that you had of the interior space, as decrepit as it is rather striking and rather interesting. But my question is this, and it may be either naive or premature or both, but there's a lot of cubic footage in there. Is there any thought being given to using some of that by way of mezzanines or other purposes to expand the useful square footage of the building?
There's some. I mean, we want to be
Yes.
careful because if we, we're thinking that we would use some upper level mezzanine storage and some other things, but we don't necessarily want to get into a situation where we put public space on an upper level because we'd be getting into elevators, and we want to make sure this building needs to be fully accessible.
Understood. Okay, that makes sense.
But it's perfectly fine for mechanical and for storage.
Yeah, it is a rather distinctive looking building from the inside.
We actually really like it and think there's a lot of potential. So, while I mentioned that we would continue to look at the full build, we do believe that the partial rehab is the most cost effective and best long-term approach.
Yeah, and then so these two, I think, show really what this could look like. The guys at Arrow Street did. I think they're really, really telling features. They look really cool. Again, this is that functional space, the seating that David was referring to, and then getting you out onto the water. So that's where we're leaning right now. Again, there's a lot that needs to still happen. This is very early kind of schematic phases, but as Bob kind of deduced, that's where we came upon too. Maybe our presentation led you down that road pointedly, but at least that's what we came up with as the best way to go. So, is there anything you guys want to add?
Architects always lead their audience.
We're completely unbiased, Bob.
Yes, I know. One other quick question, though. I mean, again, as with the previous presentation, this is really very encouraging and really, builds on the ideas out of the master plan, et cetera. To fully complete this will probably take a little bit of time. Permitting alone will probably be a challenge. Is there any possibility, or is it worth considering in the feasibility study, whether anything can be done in the interim? I'm thinking particularly of some of the community boating. I realize there might be some storage issues, et cetera, but the people that we talked to in the context of the master plan, Will Goldenheim and others, I think we're ready to deal with something that is far short of ideal to get things going. And if we could do that, I think that would be great. I don't know whether that was within the purview of the feasibility study, but interim uses could be. And I just mentioned that if it could be, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think, I think you want to have a long-term plan, even if you are trying to come up with an interim, short-term use of the site. So, it's a good point.
Start here and work back. Yeah.
Right. It's a good point because it basically, I think, leads you even more in the realm of the partial rehab, because you can imagine rehabbing the brick building and starting with that, maybe not fitting it out 100%, maybe not putting a gym, maybe using that for some of your boat storage. In that particular case, Bob, I think because of the width of the building, maybe you could use a little bit of an angled storage system to get those longer boats in. You wouldn't have those community spaces quite up front, but you might be able to actually reinforce and improve the shell of the building and then go from there.
Yeah.
Yes, we'll definitely have to take steps to secure the facility. I think we're going to be moving directly into design. So at this point, we're at the design phase for Gibson Park, which, as everyone that's been here on this call has heard, how some of those plans have spilled over into the boatyard and onto Mills Ave as well. And that's been a great benefit to the two other projects, as in addition to the Gibson Park MVP project. So with that, we're actually going to be looking to fund the design phase for the boatyard, the grounds, the building facility itself, as well as the docks. And we're going to be moving into that pretty quickly. And we're hoping to have design by 60% completed by July. And that said, we'll go from there, and we're going to be applying for Seaport Economic Council funds for final design and permitting for the boatyard.
For the site infrastructure, not necessarily for the building. I just want to clarify that. I don't think
Site infrastructure and the docks, yes. And then moving, and then for Gibson Park, we'll be applying for the next round of MVP grants in order to fund the permitting phase for Gibson Park. That will bring us to construction. So that's our next steps, where we're at now. And we'll continue to work with McAllister Engineering, Arrow Street, and likely Collins Engineering, who had the feasibility study for the docks initially. So we'll keep you all informed, and we'll invite you to our next update and community meeting. And we welcome all of your feedback and interesting questions and perspectives.
Good job.
Give us the
guys. Well done.
best results. So thank you all for giving us your Thursday evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To talk about the boatyard and Gibson Park. So thanks, everyone. Any other additional questions before we sign off, or any last comments?
Good job, guys. Keep up the good work.
Elaine, thanks for being here.
Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Good work, El. Thank you.
Again, thank you to the team for all of your effort.
Well, it's a great team. Good people to work with. Appreciate everyone.
Nice.
See you guys.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Tony.